Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's live product demo titled Enterprise Visibility is Great, but What Do I Need at the Team Level to Be Successful? My name is Sarah Spink, and I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at CollabNet version 1, and I am the moderator of today's live product demo. So in this session today, you will learn about version 1's features and benefits for Agile project and team management. We will talk about some of our most valuable features at the team level, including Team Room, Team Scorecard, sprint iteration planning, and a couple more. And one of our very best solution architects, Lonnie Harris, is here with us today to lead the demo and answer any questions you might have. So for any questions that come up during the demo, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box on the right side of the screen. We will also try to answer these questions as they're asked, but if we don't get to them during the session, we will get to them at the end. So now I will turn the discussion over to Lonnie and we'll get started. Take it away, Lonnie.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And again, thank you everybody for joining. I appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to join us. As mentioned, we're going to focus primarily on what it takes to be successful at the team level. So we're going to focus on kind of the activities near the bottom of the value stream management kind of slide that I'm sharing here. And I've got the area highlighted. I bring this up just to set a little bit of context. So if you're not familiar with version 1, CollabNet version 1, we do support the entire value stream in terms of capabilities as part of our solution. So everything from strategy through deployment. But again, we're going to focus primarily on teams and how teams can leverage version 1 specifically in context of the value creation portion of this slide. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'll introduce you first to kind of the team concept in version 1, just to kind of get a sense for what a team is. So a team in version 1 is an asset that allows us to group backlog and manage work for the team. I know most people kind of have this more traditional concept that teams are a group of people, etc. But within version 1, it's primarily a way to manage work items so that we can see team backlogs. We can kind of measure the performance of that particular team's throughput based on the work that is assigned to that team designation, et cetera. Some of the things that we capture on the team are things like target estimate or target swag, either one. Essentially, this is where a team, once they've kind of established a velocity, we'll help them out here and say, hey, this is kind of the average team delivery over the past 3 weeks. So we can kind of use that as a number here. If you're just getting started, you can use that as a target for the teams to kind of manage to. But in either case, this is an opportunity for the teams to commit to delivering a certain amount, and then we can measure towards that target. Our performances can be based on that. Our planning can be based on that. And this also helps with some additional things when we start talking about scaling. It allows for multiple team sprint planning or PI planning or any of those types of activities where multiple teams will be contributing to the value creation. So that's one aspect of the team. Another aspect of the team is the idea of teams own the process. So this is a capability that would need to be enabled in version 1 first, but once enabled, the team can define what their process looks like. In this case, our team has defined it as ready, dev done, test done and accepted. And these roll-up categories above allow us again to leverage these capabilities for at-scale reporting. So when you have multiple teams that have potentially different processes in place, the organization can map that process to these 3 categories for reporting, either not started, in progress, or completed. And those will come in handy again for at-scale capabilities. Lastly here, we'll talk a little bit about transitions. In transitions, these are essentially some of the menial tasks. So if I start a task, it will start the story, what does it mean to quick close an item, things of that nature. So these are all kind of things that the team can own, and it can be defined on the team asset within version 1. We'll circle back around in just a moment. Scorecards is on the agenda, but we'll come back to that here in just a moment as we start talking about the rest of the things that version 1 has in terms of capabilities. Kind of the meat of today is going to focus on the team room. So within version 1, the idea of a team room is essentially what a team would do in a physical environment. They would typically create a team space. They would have information radiators posted on walls, or they might be using whiteboards, things of that nature. This is a digital version of that physical team room where we would be able to leverage the team process to describe our storyboard and manage our stories and defects through that process. We can also provide views like the task board. So if your team is in the practice of breaking out user stories and defects into tasks, then we have an opportunity to provide a board like this. Again, these status values are configurable as well. So in progress and completed are kind of the default values. We can create some additional ones. These would be essentially equivalent to index cards. And then the sticky notes are the tasks that are moving across the center. The key thing really here is that what we're trying to do is create an environment, especially for distributed teams, to help support the processes that will help the teams to execute the best. So a lot of the times teams will begin a lot of these practice using manual steps, practices, and information radiators. At some point, they will start to use digital means to track their work, whether that's through Excel or any other available product like version 1 to manage their tasks and tests. And those products should provide a way to visually depict those cards and index sticky notes and things like that in a manner similar as this. So from the team's perspective, when we are going through this process, I'll talk about this in context of kind of the Scrum process. Generally speaking, most teams are adopting Scrum. We do have support for lean teams as well. So if you're kind of more of a Kanban team, we do support that as well. But today's conversation, I'll focus primarily on Scrum. So we'll start kind of at the beginning of the process and talk about planning. So planning can happen a couple of different ways. We'll circle back around and kind of look at a separate way of doing that. But generally speaking, teams will use the team planner under iteration scheduling. And the first kind of key thing for teams to be successful is to define a sprint backlog. So defining a sprint backlog in version 1 is as simple as dragging items from the backlog on the bottom half of the screen into the sprint that is currently selected, so sprint 5. So I can drag an item from the bottom into the top, and that would assign it to the sprint. Likewise, I can move that over to the left nav and drop that into any other sprint that has been defined. But this is kind of the initial way for teams to communicate to other teams as well as the organization on their commitment to deliver a certain amount of value in that backlog. So in this case, version 1 will identify the velocity over the last 4 sprints. So I can hover over these and see kind of which sprints are contributing to this average and what we delivered in that. And if we have a single team planning in a single sprint, then this would be kind of the world view for that team. As I mentioned, version 1 does support at scale. So when we have scenarios where we have multiple teams that are contributing to a sprint, that allows us to go and look at specific teams. So in this case, if I look at the core app team, remember the core app team had committed to 5 points per week. So their target will be set automatically. So we'll calculate their target as 10 points. If that needs to be changed because somebody's out, then maybe reduce that to 8 in this example. And then the teams can start planning. So as I said, kind of the first thing for the team is to define the sprint plan and make sure that they are committing to the appropriate amount of work. And the way that version 1 supports that is simply through drag and drop and providing insights into things like targets. So as they're planning the work, they can see when they've exceeded that target and some additional information in terms of what their available velocity is. Again, this is for the entire sprint. And then for this, this is the commitment from the individual team as we select that here in the sprint planner. A couple of things to note here that are going to be helpful for the team is to make sure that they're managing 2 dependencies. Notice within the sprint backlog, all of our dependency status icons are green. So this would be an indication to the team that those dependencies have been met. There's nothing additional for that team to kind of engage in, and they can kind of move forward without really needing to investigate any further about those dependencies. They may need to kind of discuss them as they're going through, but part of planning, they can simply rely on the green lights to say, okay, this is an appropriate plan, we can move forward with this. If we have a scenario where we have kind of red lights inside of the sprint, then that would just be an indication that they need to investigate what that dependency means, who that dependency is with, in case it's with another team that's participating in the same sprint, et cetera. The rest of this is really just elaboration. Again, depending on the practices that you're adopting within the organization, if you are detailing out your stories and defects into tasks, then this gives us an opportunity to gain insights into those detailed estimates. If you're not, then you can kind of skip this portion of it. There's a couple of things that version 1 does help with for teams that are trying to be successful in delivering the value that they've committed to. So for teams that are struggling to deliver on their commitments, there is an opportunity to create a sprint capacity plan. And that sprint capacity plan does require you to detail out the tasks and tests as part of that effort. And it will provide us insights into when, number 1, the team has exceeded the detail estimate for that sprint based on the members' availability. And we can also take a look at individual member plans based on their commitment and see who's over allocated at the task level. So again, if you're in the practice of breaking that out, these are tools that are helpful for those teams that may need some additional assistance. They'll need help coaching through that as well, but the version 1 will help to highlight those opportunities for coaching as well as opportunities for the team to engage and self-organize around some of those practices. We'll talk about some of these. So if these become an issue, retrospectives are a way for the team to kind of address some of those things. So we'll talk a little bit more about retrospectives in a moment, but just to touch base on them, typically what happens is a retrospective is an opportunity at the end of the sprint for the team to kind of address things that went well, things that didn't go well, things that they can improve on, et cetera. And this would be a means for capturing that. And I mention this now because typically what happens is early in the planning process, if we are forward thinking about our retrospectives, we can start to establish an agenda. So if early in the planning process we find that teams are consistently over allocated in their planning, then we can add that to the agenda and we can make sure that we are discussing that during the retrospective portion. All right, and you'll notice as I'm going through this, right, version 1 helps you kind of understand where in the process you are. So iteration planning, we've got these set of views that will help the team kind of manage some of those aspects. As we get into iteration tracking, we'll move over back into the team room. But there is an opportunity to kind of keep using the system views. But we're going to move into the team rooms because this is where we can start to engage in other things like communities of practices, conversations in line, et cetera. We could even pull in other systems like Jenkins or any other system that might be supporting the team in that way. So I did want to pause for a moment. We're about 15 minutes in. We do have a questions area available. So I wanted to kind of point that out. If you have questions, feel free to submit them there. But I will pause for just a moment to see if we do have any questions before moving forward.
No questions in the chat box yet, Lonnie, but I encourage
Perfect.
people to put in there, and as soon as they pop up, I'll.
Excellent, excellent. And I will probably pause one more time before we wrap things up to see if we have any additional questions to address. Hopefully I'm covering the right topics. That question area will help you to guide me to areas that may be important to you. If you have any specific questions, I may not touch on everything. So if you see something that I didn't cover that you'd like me to cover, just let me know there. Or if you have a clarifying question about something that I do cover, submit those in the questions box as well. Before we get into this, I suppose one thing that I should have done as we got started is kind of give you just a little bit of brief about me and kind of where I come from. So I started Extreme Programming back in 2000. So historically, I'm a practitioner. I've coached teams. I've consulted organizations in improving their teams as well as scaling. Here, the last 10 years, I've been a part of the CollabNet version 1 team, and I've been helping organizations leverage version 1 in all of those different scenarios and contexts. So that's just a little bit about me so that you guys have a kind of a sense for where my background is and what I'm talking about. So getting back to version 1 and the team level. So what are some other things that the teams need to be successful? Teams need to have visibility into those information radios that the team has kind of decided are the norms for their team. So when we talk about teams, team norms kind of come into play. There are certain metrics that they're going to use to manage to. One of those things is going to be velocity. In most cases, especially for Scrum teams. So that target velocity that I mentioned in the sprint planning is one of those kind of visibility things. So if the team commits to 5 points a week, and we have 2-week sprints, their target is 10 points per sprint. If they exceed 10 points during planning, then they know that they need to do something to adjust their plan. Same thing with the sprint capacity that I described. If we have that enabled in version 1 and the teams need to manage at the task and test level their time within the sprint because maybe you have a QA person that is supporting multiple teams or any scenario where that might be helpful, then those kinds of tools will help to guide the team to, again, self-organize around those practices and kind of resolve those issues iteratively. Here in the team room, we've talked about the storyboard, the task board, and the test board. As teams get past the initial planning and they get into kind of the day-to-day, this is a view that teams use to support their daily stand-up. As they provide their individual kind of updates. So what did I do yesterday? What do I plan to do today? And do I have any impediments? All of that can be updated in real time. So Danny says, all right, I've completed something on this story. I'm going to pick up something new in this other story. I'm making these updates. As I complete things, I can also track my time if that is something that we need to do. So I can say, okay, well, I've spent 3 hours on it yesterday and there's nothing left to do, or I spent 2 hours on it yesterday and I found out there's another half day's worth of work. So I can make these updates during all of these kind of things that I'm doing as we are facilitating the daily stand-up, and these will help to drive a lot of the reports. So notice up in the top right, the burn down chart. The burn down chart is another tool that the team will use to help ensure success. In this particular case, this is the sprint or iteration burn down. As we expand that and review the details, you'll notice that this kind of stair steps. So this is just an indication that the team is not updating their to-do values on a consistent basis. So it looks like every couple of days they'll make an update. And in this case, it's been about 3 or 4 days since their last update as a team. Again, this can be a topic for that team to put in the agenda to help them overcome any issues like this. So for example, on my extreme programming teams, we had put a practice in place where all of our tasks had to be had to be at least 4 hours to be put in as a task, but it couldn't exceed 1 day. So that forced us to ensure that we were completing tasks every day and that we were consistently making updates within our systems to support these types of reporting. That may not be as important as long as teams are kind of completing their work. Other teams that aren't defining tasks wouldn't use this burn down. We have another burn down at the story level, and that will help them kind of manage kind of completion at the story level. And again, those are kind of practice-based, but I kind of share some of these tools. So in case you are part of a team that has a specific practice in place, what I would say is that if I don't cover that as part of today in terms of what it takes for a team to be successful, just know that we do support a lot of the practices that XP and Scrum teams do, like pair programming and things like that. So if I don't cover them, that doesn't mean that we don't support them. It just means that you may want to engage with your account manager, and they'll either introduce you to one of our coaches, or if you have an internal practice, you can engage with your internal coaches to address some of those, and we can help with making sure that they understand how it is supported inside of version 1. Having said that, one of the other tools that I wanted to touch on was topics. So topics is an opportunity for us to capture community of practice content within version 1. So things like coding standards as a practice, common code base, continuous integration, definition of done, estimation practices, pair programming. These are all practices that within an organization, teams at different levels of maturity will be adopting different types of practices to overcome different challenges within that team. This is an opportunity to capture those details within a community of practice. And now as a team starts to adopt a new practice, if another team has success with it, then we can start to collaborate with those other members within the system that have succeeded in using it, and we can accelerate kind of our practice adoption through the use of communities of practice and topics within version 1. So this is another tool that we provide within CollabNet version 1 to support team success. That collaboration extends to other things like the work and other members within the system. So we do have a conversations. Conversations are an internal communication tool to CollabNet version 1, and this allows members to engage other members on the work that is being managed within version 1. So this is Danny, who is collaborating with Ellen and Tammy on NRRMA. And it is showing up here in the team room because Danny, number one, is in the team room. And NRRMA is also a story in the team room. So this is showing up here. So anything that a member of the team is collaborating on, whether the work is in this room or not, it will show up in the stream. If anybody in the system is collaborating on any of the work in here, it will show up in that list as well. So this gives us, again, context. So in real time, as conversations are happening, we can engage in those conversations, or if we don't need to engage in those conversations, but we have an interest in the outcome of that, we can watch the conversation. So we can become involved and get notifications about those and make sure that we're following kind of the progress of that topic of conversation, and that we are opting into that versus it just always being on everywhere in the system. So collaboration is important, especially if you're a distributed team. So usually when teams are using tools like version 1, it's because they are remote teams. So someone on their team is not co-located, or they're all distributed in some form or fashion, whether it's in the same building on different floors or in different geographical locations. This type of capability is super important. There are other tools that we do integrate with, so things like Slack will integrate into this conversation stream as well. We can integrate into other tool kind of chat facilities or messaging facilities to make sure that we have a single place for understanding that. And speaking of context, we do provide tools and conversations at the asset level. So in this case, on the user story, because somebody has mentioned that user story in their collaboration, it is showing up in context of that particular user story. So again, if any pre-work has happened on the user story prior to sprint planning, and the team comes to estimate this, this is an opportunity to review these artifacts, understand what decisions might have been made, what conversations might have been made about the scope of a story, and that might help contribute to the estimation of this story. In this case, 2 points. Speaking of estimation, we do provide estimation tools called Estimably. So let's turn off some of these panels here. So if you're not familiar with Estimably within version 1, it's simply an electronic planning poker tool. So what happens is a host will start the game. That's usually the product owner. So the product owner will start a game. They'll issue a URL to the other team members. So we'll take this one, and and we'll open up another browser. All right, so we'll open up another browser. I'll enter my name. The ID is pre-populated, and I'll join. So what happens is when our host, the product owner, wants to kind of engage the team for estimation, they'll typically look in the backlog for things that are unestimated, so we can show only the unestimated items. Whoops. And what they'll do is they'll drag that onto the field, and they'll have a conversation with the team about the story itself. They'll collaborate with the team, and once we're ready to estimate that particular story, we'll begin the round. I'm having trouble joining it. So what would happen is that the team member would have a list of values they can choose from. It's a modified Fibonacci, so 1, 2, 3, 5s. 8, etc. And they'll select their estimation. We'll notice that individuals have contributed their estimations. When we end the round, it will give us a result, and it will show me who voted for what. If we have a consensus, we can move forward with that. If we don't, we can continue the collaboration and either rerun the vote, or we can commit to a specific value and enter that in. So this is just another way for the teams to engage interactively for distributed teams in terms of making sure that they have estimations within the system so that they can do proper planning during the next sprint and proper breakdown if you're breaking items down into the task and or test levels. All right, so as I mentioned, I was going to pause one more time before we got to the end. So we're about 30 minutes into the demonstration. Let's see if there's any other questions before I proceed, and I'll start wrapping things up. And we should be done here in about another 15 minutes or so.
No questions yet, Lonnie.
Excellent. Must be doing an awesome job at covering all the topics that are interesting.
Sorry, there is one question. I found one.
All right.
All righty. Can there be 2-week and 3-week sprints in the team area at the same time?
Can there be 2-week and 3-week sprints in the team area at the same time? So within a team room, the team room is tied to a sprint schedule. So within a team room, you could only have either a 2-week or a 3-week sprint. But within the system, you can have a scenario where some teams are sprinting on 2 weeks and other teams are sprinting on 3 weeks. So that's separate from the team room. But within the team room, the answer is no. Outside of the team room, it is supported inside of version 1.
Sounds good. And then we have another question. Do you need to be an administrator to access the team setup screen?
The team setup screen. There is a role access to that. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. I believe it is a team lead or above. So within the system, if you're a team lead or a project admin or anything above team lead, then you have access to the team configuration screens that I was shown at the beginning.
Perfect. Thank you, Lonnie.
Excellent. All right. Good questions. So I've talked a lot about kind of the team room, some of the tools that will be needed for teams to be successful. A lot of it is really around making sure that we're supporting the team's way of working. So we talked about how are we supporting them in terms of community of practice, and are there ways to kind of distribute that knowledge to the teams directly and collaborate with other contributors to those topics or communities of practice. So that's one thing. Other things are integrating into other tools. So one easy way is to simply create a panel with access to other supporting tools. In this case, I just pulled in Jenkins, but it could be any other third-party tool that you may be needing. We do integrate in other ways, as I mentioned. So conversations can be driven through integrations with things like Slack or other systems messaging solutions. So that option is available. Activity streams, we didn't really touch on. We did touch on these different information raters. We did touch on backlog and estimation. So these are kind of all things that are contribute to a team's success. And I think the thing that I would say more so than what features and tools does version 1 provide to support the team is if you are using any form of digital project management solution, is that the tool that you're using should support the practices that you at least are already doing. And what version 1 is really good at, or has had a strong focus on, is supporting practices that the team could adopt. So we want to meet the teams where they are from a version 1 perspective, and we want to be able to grow with the team so as they adopt new practices and improve, that they can continue to use version 1 through all of those different stages. All right, so let's kind of move into the next stage of the team kind of process. We've talked a little bit about the burn down chart. I will pull up the concept of a scorecard. I promised that I would. So the scorecard provides us kind of a overview, KPIs and metrics for the team room performance. What I mean by that is this is specific to this team room and the work that's being managed within it. So Sprint 5 for this team, they have 26 points planned. None of it is unestimated. They had 145 hours detailed out. They have 34 hours remaining to do. They've captured 50 hours, so there's a disparity here already. So we've got, what, 85 hours. So there's a 50-hour swing or variance between what was detailed out and what we've captured and what's remaining. So that might be a topic to throw into the retrospective. Other things that we're looking at here are our velocities. So the scorecard provides a plan versus actuals. Understanding what we committed to and what we completed is going to be important. So in this case, in Sprint 4, we planned to complete 15, and we actually completed 5. Just looking at this, the team doesn't have a stable velocity, so they're delivering a lot of work sometimes and not so much other times. So this team is still trying to figure out kind of their stride. So all of this information is going to help provide kind of agenda items for that team to kind of organize around and resolve some of these issues. So in this case, as a coach, I might leverage the sprint capacity planning to help this team kind of level set and understand what their capacity issues are. It could be that they don't have stable teams, maybe members are floating between teams, whatever the case that may be. But this type of information is going to be helpful in determining how best to resolve those issues. And then some other things, we get into some individual kind of performance metrics. So, individual members can kind of see, hey, I'm struggling with one thing or another. Other teams can assist with that. Other team members can assist with that. There's other ways to kind of break this out in terms of projects or active portfolio items. But this is an example of a scorecard. And these scorecards are available throughout the system. So you'll be able to see them on epics. You'll be able to see them on releases. You'll be able to see them on the team itself. So as I mentioned, there's on the team, there was a scorecard here. So this is all of the work in the system for that team, not just Sprint 5. And it gives me kind of overall insights into this particular team and all the work. In this case, the data is relatively the same, but this would be kind of a much larger scope in terms of what it's reporting on this scorecard versus the team room scorecard. All right, so let's kind of move to the end. So we talked about planning. We talked about tracking. What are some of the tools that version 1 provides, or what are some of the tools that the team might need to be successful? Again, not all teams will need all of these things. But version 1 does try to make sure that it has a way to support those needs. So the review process, part of that is to close out the iteration or the sprint. So as we look at that, the goal really is to say, okay, these are all the things that we committed to. And as we reach the end of the sprint, we want to, number one, demonstrate the value that was generated during that sprint. We're going to demonstrate the working software. We're going to make sure that we've met the definition of done. And if we have, the product owner can close this out. It will move to the closed items backlog down below. And again, this scenario is if your team, waits till the end of the sprint to kind of do this. Some teams that I've worked on, as they're swarming on a story, will complete them as they finish them. So you may get to this and everything is already in a closed state. And the only thing we need to do is address anything that isn't. So in this scenario, let's say that we didn't get to quick status check. So we want to be able to move that entire thing into the next sprint. Another option is we started something, but we didn't finish it. So we have 20 hours remaining on NRRMA. So we can do a couple of things. We can decide to move the entire thing into the next sprint. That will move all of the data associated with the story into the next sprint and eliminate it from the current sprint. Another option is to split the story. So we do have a way to split stories. And by default, what this does is it takes all of the work that has been completed in the current sprint, and it will remain in sprint 5. And anything that has work remaining will be copied and moved into the next sprint. So if I split this, anything that has to-do values will move into a new story in sprint 6. And what will also happen is that the estimate by default, so the 2 points that the story was estimated at, moves wholly into the next sprint. So, we're not supporting by default this idea that, hey, we completed some of it in the first sprint and some of it in the next sprint. You didn't complete it all, so you don't get credit for velocity because not all of it's completed. So by default, we do this. But this would be your opportunity if you have a practice in place to say, well, we finished half of it in each of the sprints. So we're going to kind of split that up. This would be our opportunity to do that. This is also an opportunity to say, okay, I forgot this thing was done too, so I can move this down into the next sprint in the story. I just need to make sure that I update those details and say, okay, this thing isn't completed. There is still work remaining on it, whatever the case may be. I can move this up and say, oh, this was completed, and I move it back into the next sprint. But this is your opportunity to modify any of those details before moving forward. If I save it off, it captures all of those details. And I can now close NRRMA. All right, so closing out the process does a couple of things. It allows the team to kind of showcase the value that they've generated. It gives them an opportunity to exercise their definition of done to ensure that they are delivering value to the organization and to the customers. And it does give them an opportunity to also reflect on the initial kind of what do we do in terms of not completing work successfully and how we're going to move forward with that. So like, how do we deal with remaining work in general as a team? So once we've dealt with all of that, that will allow us to close out the sprint. So let me just close all of these out. Once those have all been dealt with, this will give us an opportunity to, once all of the teams have completed that process, so I'll go finish closing out the rest of these things, then the sprint itself can be closed, and it will activate sprint 6, so that now all of the teams that are participating in iteration planning can now start planning for sprint 6, and that process can kind of repeat. What teams will do typically is also conduct a retrospective So as I mentioned, retrospectives are a way for teams to kind of capture what went well, what could be improved, and if there were any impediments. So these can all be captured. So I've created a core app team, release 1 sprint 5 retrospective, and I want to conduct it. In this case, we have captured our agenda items throughout the sprint. And now we're going to capture the summary. So, this is the content that we discussed, and the outcomes of that conversation are here. Other things that may have happened is we've identified process improvement stories. If those are the case, so let's say, pair programming, or maybe there's some technical debt that you need to deal with, or unit testing or refactoring kind of efforts. If any of those types of things, we can save those off, and that work will be placed in the backlog. It will also be tagged as something that was generated from this retrospective. So this now becomes a knowledge repository for process improvement and for team retrospectives, so that, again, in addition to communities of practice, this will give teams an opportunity to be able to go back and review their retrospectives and kind of understand where they were and where they're going. As far as I know, version 1 has explicit support for retrospectives. I'm not aware of other solutions that have it, but if you're using any electronic tool, it should, at the very least, if you're doing retrospectives, it should support retrospectives, and version 1 does provide a way to do that. So those are kind of all the different things that teams will need to be successful. A lot of that will generate other data and other information that will be consumed for at scale purposes, but we'll leave that for another live product demonstration. And in this particular case, we have reached the end of our time. We have reached the end of what I had planned on demonstrating, but I will open the floor to any additional questions. So
one last question.
Excellent.
So if a team member is a specialist role and a member of multiple teams, does V1 roll up that person's time commitment across different teams?
Does V1 roll up the time commitment for that individual? So the short answer is it doesn't roll it up in the system. So give me just a moment, and I think I can demonstrate that for you. It does roll up the information for that member to review their capacity against the work that they are committed to in other sprints, but there's not like a system-wide roll-up somewhere where you can see, as a manager, so-and-so is over-allocated by X number amount across multiple sprints. What it does is this is a tool for the team member to self-organize around and manage their time. So let me just show you. I think I have a scenario very similar to that already set up. Member capacity, right? And in this case, I have my data set inside of release 1. So if I look at the platform team, I've got the same members in the platform team as I do the core app team. So the idea is, let's say Alfred is split between 2 teams in multiple sprints. Then Alfred can say, well, I have 30 hours for sprint 6 on this team and another 30 hours for the sprint on this team, and this will, for that member, allow us to look at their details. So we do have this chart that allows us to see for that member in sprint 6 or other sprints how they stack up and where they're over allocated and things like that, what their capacity issues are, so that the member can overcome their capacity issues. So that's the level of support that we do have in terms of rolling up the data. Hopefully that helps answer that question.
Perfect, sounds good. Well, thank you, Lonnie, for today's demo. It was great as usual. And thank you, everybody, for joining today and for your interest in CollabNet version 1. I do want to mention before we close out that we work with companies that are at all stages of implementing their scaling Agile and DevOps initiatives. We also offer coaching services for those who want some additional training to be successful on their analytics and DevOps journey. If you have any questions or are interested in learning more about our offerings, feel free to email us at info@collab.net, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. That's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, again.
Bye-bye.